Imagine this: you're sitting in a room full of people, yet you feel utterly alone. Not just uncomfortable, but like the air itself is pressing down on your chest. Now picture someone else, maybe across the world, sitting in complete isolation, and yet they feel completely at peace. Why does loneliness feel so vastly different for everyone? And more importantly, why does it seem to come in waves, sometimes fleeting, sometimes so heavy it feels like it's swallowing us whole? Today, we're diving into a psychological journey through the 5 levels of loneliness a human could experience. And I promise, by the end of this video, you won't just understand loneliness, you'll know how to face it, how to help others through it, and how to transform it into something meaningful. But wait, what if I told you that the loneliness you're feeling right now, yes, the one you're trying to ignore, might not even be yours? What if it's a layer of loneliness you've inherited, absorbed, or even grown into without realizing it? Hold on to that thought, because we're about to break down the science, the psychology, and the experiments that reveal the true nature of loneliness. Let's go. Let's start with the question: have you ever considered that loneliness isn't just one emotion, but a spectrum of experiences? Researchers and psychologists have identified 5 distinct levels of loneliness, each more intense and profound than the last. I know, 5 levels might sound overwhelming, but think of it like this: loneliness isn't just about being alone, it's about the gap between the connections we crave and the connections we actually have. It's a psychological experience, deeply rooted in both our biology and our environment. The first level is situational loneliness. This is something we've all experienced at some point. Maybe you've moved to a new city, started a new job, or lost someone close to you. It's that feeling of being out of place, untethered, like a fish out of water. Psychologists describe this as a temporary state, one triggered by a specific event or change in our environment. But here's the tricky part: while situational loneliness is often fleeting, it can linger and evolve into something deeper if we don't address it. Click subscribe to this channel to get more insights into human psychology. Let me tell you a quick story. A participant in a study I once read about, let's call her Sarah, moved to a big city for her dream job. At first, she was excited: new opportunities, new people, a fresh start. But as the weeks went by, she started feeling disconnected. She'd go to work, come home, and repeat. Even when she joined social events, she felt like she didn't belong. It wasn't that she didn't want to connect, she just didn't know how to bridge the gap between new acquaintance and meaningful relationship. Over time, her situational loneliness became chronic. And this brings us to the second level, developmental loneliness. This level is tied to the transitions we go through in life: adolescence, leaving home, aging, retirement. It's during these periods that we often feel like no one truly understands what we're going through. Think back to your teenage years. Remember that overwhelming feeling of being misunderstood, like no one could possibly get you. That's developmental loneliness in action. It's not just about being physically alone, it's about feeling emotionally disconnected from the people around you. Here's where things get interesting. In a groundbreaking experiment, researchers asked teenagers to describe their feelings of loneliness. What they found was astounding: many of them didn't feel lonely because they were isolated. They felt lonely because they were surrounded by people who didn't share their values, their struggles, or their perspective on life. This insight is crucial because it shows us that loneliness isn't just a numbers game. You can have hundreds of friends and still feel utterly alone if those connections lack depth and authenticity. Now, let's pause for a second. I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were stuck in a cycle, where no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness. Maybe you've been in a crowd, at a party, or even with close friends, and still felt that nagging emptiness. If so, you might be tapping into the third level chronic loneliness. This is where loneliness starts to become more than just an emotional experience. Chronic loneliness is like a shadow that follows you everywhere, even on your brightest days. It's persistent, often lasting months or even years. And the thing about chronic loneliness is that it can start to affect your mental and physical health. Studies have shown that people who experience chronic loneliness are more likely to suffer from anxiety, depression, and even physical illnesses like heart disease. Let me tell you about another experiment. A group of participants was asked to spend time alone every day for a month. Some of them thrived. They used the time for self-reflection, creativity, and relaxation. But others found themselves spiraling. They reported feeling more anxious, more disconnected, and even more physically tired. The difference? It wasn't just about being alone. It was about how they perceived their aloneness. Those who viewed solitude as a choice felt empowered. Those who saw it as a rejection felt trapped. But chronic loneliness isn't just about perception. It can also stem from deeper issues, like a lack of social skills, unresolved trauma, or unhealthy relationship patterns. For example, imagine someone who grew up in a household where vulnerability was seen as a weakness. As an adult, they might struggle to open up to others, even when they desperately want connection. This creates a vicious cycle. The more they isolate themselves, the lonelier they feel, and the harder it becomes to reach out. So, what can we do about it? How do we break the cycle of chronic loneliness? One approach is to focus on building meaningful connections rather than just increasing the number of people in your life. It's about quality, not quantity. And sometimes that means taking risks, being vulnerable, sharing your true self, and trusting that the right people will respond. But before we dive deeper into solutions, I want to leave you with a thought. Loneliness, at its core, is a universal experience. It's something we all face at different points in our lives. And while it can feel overwhelming, it's also an opportunity, a chance to learn more about ourselves, to grow, and to connect with others on a deeper level. Let's keep going. Now that we've explored situational, developmental, and chronic loneliness, let's dive even deeper. Because the next two levels of loneliness, existential and intense loneliness, aren't just about our environment, our life stages, or even our habits. They're about the very core of what it means to be human. These levels go beyond the surface and touch the raw, often unspoken truths of our existence. Existential loneliness, the fourth level, is something that many of us may not immediately recognize, but it's there, lingering beneath the surface. This is a profound kind of loneliness that doesn't necessarily come from being physically or socially isolated. Instead, it's tied to the realization that no matter how connected we are to others, there's a part of our experience, our inner thoughts, fears, and dreams that no one else can fully share or understand. It's the kind of loneliness that emerges when we're confronted with the vastness of life, the inevitability of death, or our search for meaning in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where you were surrounded by people, even people you love, but still felt like no one could truly see you? Maybe it was a quiet thought, a fleeting moment of reflection, or a sleepless night where the weight of your own existence hit you like a tidal wave. That's existential loneliness. And the truth is, It's something we all face at some point. It's not a flaw or a failure, it's part of being human. Psychologists and philosophers have long studied this phenomenon. One famous experiment involved asking participants to sit alone in a room with nothing but their thoughts for 15 minutes. No phone, no distractions, just themselves. The result? A significant number of participants reported feeling deeply uncomfortable, even distressed. Some said it felt like they were confronting a void. Others described a sense of unease, like facing a mirror that reflected not their face, but their innermost fears and insecurities. Why does this happen? Because existential loneliness forces us to confront questions we often try to avoid. Who am I? What is my purpose? What if no one truly understands me? These aren't easy questions, and they don't have simple answers. But here's the thing, while existential loneliness can feel isolating, it's also an opportunity. It's a chance to explore who we are at our core, to embrace our individuality, and to find meaning in the connections we do have, even if they're imperfect. One practical approach to navigating existential loneliness is mindfulness. By learning to sit with our thoughts and emotions, without judgment, we can start to make peace with the parts of ourselves that feel unshared or unseen. Another approach is to engage in creative expression, writing, painting, music, or any activity that allows us to translate our inner world into something tangible. These acts of creation can help us bridge the gap between our internal experience and the external world, reminding us that while we may feel isolated, we're never truly alone in our humanity. Now, let's move to the fifth and final level: intense loneliness. This is the most severe form of loneliness, one that can feel all-consuming and, in some cases, even life-threatening. Intense loneliness often stems from a combination of factors: situational, developmental, chronic, and existential, but it's amplified to such a degree that it can overwhelm a person's ability to cope. This is the kind of loneliness that can lead to despair, hopelessness, and even suicidal thoughts if left unaddressed. Let me share a story. There was a study conducted with individuals who had recently experienced a major life crisis: loss of a loved one, a divorce, or a significant health diagnosis. Many of them described their loneliness not just as emotional, but as physical. One participant said it felt like a weight pressing down on their chest, making it hard to breathe. Another described it as a hollow ache, like a piece of them was missing. This is the reality of intense loneliness. It doesn't just affect your mind, it impacts your body, your energy, your very will to keep going. The scary part is that intense loneliness often creates a feedback loop. The more isolated someone feels, the harder it becomes to reach out for help, and the longer they stay isolated, the deeper their loneliness becomes. It's a vicious cycle, one that can feel impossible to break. But here's the good news: it can be broken, and it starts with small, deliberate steps. One of the most effective strategies for addressing intense loneliness is seeking professional help. Therapy can provide a safe space to explore the emotions and experiences that contribute to loneliness, while also offering tools to rebuild connections and find hope. For example, cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT) can help individuals identify and challenge the negative thought patterns that often accompany intense loneliness, such as "I'm unworthy of love" or "no one will ever care about me." But professional help is just one piece of the puzzle. Another critical component is community. Even when it feels impossible, taking steps to connect with others, whether through support groups, volunteer activities, or shared hobbies, can make a world of difference. And if you're watching this and thinking, "But I don't have the energy to connect," know that you're not alone in feeling that way. Start small. Send a text. Join an online group. Even a single conversation can be a lifeline. Here's something fascinating. Studies have shown that acts of kindness, even small ones, can reduce feelings of loneliness. When we help others, we not only create connections, we also remind ourselves of our own value and purpose. So if you're feeling intensely lonely, consider this: what if the first step to healing isn't waiting for someone else to reach out to you, but reaching out to someone else? It might feel counterintuitive, but it works. I want to pause here and ask you something. How often do we really talk about loneliness? Not just the surface level "I'm feeling a bit off today," but the deep, aching loneliness that so many of us carry in silence. If you've ever felt like you're the only one struggling, I want you to know this: you're not alone. Loneliness is a shared human experience, and by talking about it, by acknowledging it, we can start to break the stigma and create spaces where connection thrives. Now that we've explored the 5 levels of loneliness, let's shift our focus to something even more profound. What can we do about it? How do we take this understanding of loneliness and transform it into actionable steps? Because here's the truth: loneliness is not a fixed state. It's fluid, it changes, and most importantly, it can be alleviated no matter how deep it feels. Let's start by addressing situational loneliness. Since it's often triggered by life changes like moving, starting a new job, or losing a loved one, the key to navigating this type of loneliness is adaptability. Remember Sarah, the participant who struggled to connect after moving to a new city. What ultimately helped her wasn't just time, it was action. She started by joining a local book club, something that aligned with her interests. At first, she felt awkward, like an outsider. But over time, she noticed something surprising: the act of consistently showing up, even when it felt uncomfortable, started to build familiarity, and familiarity is the foundation of connection. Here's a practical takeaway: when you're experiencing situational loneliness, focus on building micro-connections. These don't have to be deep or immediate. Say hello to your neighbor. Strike up a conversation with a coworker. Join a community event, even if you don't feel like it. These small acts of engagement might not solve your loneliness overnight, but they create opportunities for connection to grow. And sometimes that's all we need: a starting point. When it comes to developmental loneliness, the approach is slightly different. This type of loneliness is deeply tied to transitions and identity. Think about adolescence, for example. But teenagers often feel like no one understands them, not because they're truly isolated, but because they're in the process of figuring out who they are. The same thing happens during other major life stages, like becoming a parent, retiring, or even entering middle age. In these moments, loneliness can feel like a side effect of change. So, how do we address this? One of the most effective strategies is self-reflection paired with intentional action. Journaling, for example, can be incredibly powerful. Write about your feelings of loneliness, but don't stop there. Ask yourself, what am I longing for? What connections do I want to build? And what steps can I take to get there? This process of introspection can help clarify the root of your loneliness and guide you towards solutions that resonate with your unique circumstances. But here's where it gets interesting. Developmental loneliness isn't just about finding external connections, it's also about deepening your connection with yourself. One experiment demonstrated this beautifully. Participants were asked to write letters to their future selves, reflecting on their current struggles and aspirations. Months later, when they revisited these letters, Many reported feeling a sense of comfort and understanding, as if they had built a bridge between their present and future selves. This exercise is a reminder that sometimes the connection we need most is the one with our own evolving identity. Now, let's talk about chronic loneliness. This is where things can get tricky, because chronic loneliness often creates a psychological trap. The longer we feel lonely, the more we start to believe that loneliness is inevitable, that we're unworthy of connection, or that no one will ever understand us. These beliefs can become self-fulfilling, making it even harder to break free. One of the most effective ways to address chronic loneliness is through cognitive restructuring. This is a fancy way of saying challenge your thoughts. For example, if you find yourself thinking, "No one cares about me," ask yourself, is that really true? Can I think of one person who has shown me kindness or care, even in a small way? This process of questioning your negative thoughts can start to shift your perspective, opening the door to new possibilities. Here's a practical exercise you can try. Create a connection journal every day. Write down one interaction, big or small, that made you feel connected to someone else. Maybe it's a smile from a stranger, a text from a friend, or a meaningful conversation with a coworker. Over time, this journal can serve as a powerful reminder that connection exists, even when it feels hard to see. For those experiencing chronic loneliness, therapy can also be a game changer. A therapist can help you identify patterns in your relationships, build social skills, and develop strategies for fostering deeper connections. But therapy isn't just about learning new skills, it's also about being seen. Sometimes, the simple act of sharing your story with someone who listens without judgment can be profoundly healing. Let's move on to existential loneliness. This is perhaps the most challenging level to address, because it's not just about our relationships with others, it's about our relationship with life itself. Existential loneliness arises from the realization that, no matter how connected we are, there will always be aspects of our experience that are uniquely ours. It's the loneliness of facing our own mortality, of grappling with questions about meaning and purpose. One way to navigate existential loneliness is through existential acceptance. This doesn't mean resigning yourself to loneliness, it means embracing the fact that some aspects of life are inherently solitary, and that's okay. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote extensively about this in his book Man's Search for Meaning. He argued that even in the most isolating circumstances, we can find meaning by focusing on what we can control: our attitudes, our actions, and the way we choose to engage with the world. Here's a powerful exercise inspired by Frankl's work. Take a moment to reflect on the ways you bring meaning to your life. Maybe it's through your relationships, your work, your creativity, or your acts of kindness. Write these down. Then ask yourself, how can I expand these sources of meaning? This exercise is a reminder that while existential loneliness is a part of life, it doesn't have to define it. Finally, let's address intense loneliness. When loneliness reaches this level, it can feel like there's no way out. But there is. The first step is recognizing that intense loneliness is not a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of your circumstances. And circumstances can change. One of the most effective ways to combat intense loneliness is to focus on the present moment. When we're deeply lonely, our thoughts often spiral into the past: why did this happen to me? Or the future: what if I'm always alone? Mindfulness can help interrupt this cycle. By grounding yourself in the present through deep breathing, meditation, or simply noticing the sensations around you, you can start to create a sense of calm and clarity. Another strategy is to seek out support networks. This might mean reaching out to friends or family, joining a community group, or even connecting with others online. And if that feels too overwhelming, start small. Send one message. Make one phone call. Take one step, because every step you take toward connection, no matter how small, is a step away from loneliness. Here's something I want you to remember: loneliness is not a permanent state. It's a signal, a reminder that we're wired for connection. And while the journey out of loneliness can be challenging, it's also one of the most transformative journeys we can take. Because in facing our loneliness, we don't just find connection, we find ourselves. And as we wrap up this exploration of the 5 levels of loneliness, I want to leave you with a question: what's one small step you can take today to connect with yourself, with others, or with the world around you? Whatever it is, take it. Because the path out of loneliness starts with a single step. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. I hope it's been as meaningful for you as it has been for me.